everyone, it's Sevy and welcome to my CE server video on Varka, the Grandmaster of the Knights of Favonius. We've waited 5 years for this guy. He is tall, he is jacked, and he will be soon, very soon, he will be playable. Now in this video I'm going to go over how he works, some important notes on his build and his kit, team stuff, Constellation info, and my first impressions of him. This being the CE server, as usual, this isn't the official version and there might be some changes, but highly unlikely, so let's just get into it. Alright, so Varka's kit, how exactly does he work? First of all, we are once again going to ignore the new character's normal attack talent. We're ignoring it. Now, we'll move on to his skill, and before getting into his combat, if you hold his skill, he jumps forward, and his exploration talent actually lets Mondstadt members reduce that ability's cooldown. So it's just like a little fun exploration leap type thing. It seems to be in line with his character. Alright, moving on to his combat. So, if you tap his skill, he enters Sturm and Drang mode for 12 seconds, and it is dual wielding claymore time. So, Sturm and Drang mode converts his normal attacks into elemental damage. His left claymore will deal Anemo damage, his right claymore will deal PHEC or Pyro Hydro Electro Cryo damage based on the elements of teammates. So, PHEC is also the priority, so if you have Pyro and Hydro teammates, for example, he's going to deal Pyro damage because that's the higher priority in the sequence. And keep in mind that that priority will be followed for all his other abilities that consider PHEC. Also, his middle claymore will deal damage to me. One super interesting thing to note here is that the bigger numbers on his hits actually aren't the Anemo damage. They're the other element, and this will be important for his build notes later. Anyway, you'll also notice that while he's in this mode, his skill button gains 2 charges. These charges can be used either for a special skill or a special charged attack, and these charges by themselves have an 11-second cooldown, but when Varka's normal attacks hit opponents, it'll reduce that cooldown by 0.5 seconds each time. However, his Hexerei passive, yes, Varka is a Hexerei character, turns that 0.5 seconds into 1 second cooldown reduction. This is something I would personally lean into for his team building, but it's not always necessary, and I'll come back to this part later. Anyway, similar to his enhanced normal attacks, his special skill and special charge attack both deal Anemo damage and PHEC damage depending on who's in the team. The special skill for Wind's Ascension is an AoE attack with slightly lower multipliers, while the special charge attack, Azure Devour, seems to be single target mostly with slightly higher multipliers. So his on-field time will mostly consist of entering his skill mode, spamming normal attacks until you can use his special skill or charged attack, which you can use up to 2 times because it's 2 charges, and then swapping off after his skill mode ends, or sooner than that if you like. And then Varka's elemental burst is just a simple damage ult, and with PHEC teammates, the first hit of his burst will be converted into the corresponding element. And note that his burst doesn't reduce his special skill cooldown, so using it during his special state won't help you get those skill charges faster. Alright, now let's go over his passives. The Dawn Wind's March is a very important passive, and it's very long, so let's break it down. First, this passive gives him elemental damage bonus of Anemo damage and the prioritized PHEC element based on his attack stat, and this maxes out at 25% damage bonus with 2500 attack. Next, if you have 2 Anemo characters on the party or 2 teammates of the same PHEC element, Varka's attacks in the Sturm and Drang mode will be buffed by 140%. But if you have 2 Anemos on the party and 2 same element PHEC teammates, Varka's Sturm and Drang mode will be buffed by 220%. Note that this part of the passive doesn't buff his burst, so his burst will be noticeably relatively weaker compared to the rest of his kit. This basically tells us that his best teams will be 2 Anemo, 2 Pyro, or 2 Hydro, or 2 Electro, or 2 Cryo. 2 teams. It's not technically a team restriction per se, but it is an incentive that will heavily influence his team building. It's something you basically want to lean into as much as you can. And then, yeah, he has another passive, Wind's Vanguard, where Varka gets damage bonus stacks when someone on the party triggers swirls, and that 7.5% increase max of 4 stacks, so it maxes out at 30% damage bonus. And as long as you're playing him with recommended team building, this will be very easy to fulfill. He will also be doing a lot of swirls, and depending on who your Anemo teammate is, there will be swirls from them as well. So it's basically always going to be on. Okay, so that is his kit, and even though bits of it were pretty wordy, honestly, it's the gameplay of it isn't that different from the recent characters. So here's the simplified, step-by-step, broken down kind of a razor language rotation. First, set up buffs. Teammates, do their thing. Then swap Varka in. Press his skill to enter Sturm and Drang mode. Use normal attacks to bonk the enemy. And when the skill button turns pretty, use either his skill or charged attack. And repeat that until his special state ends. Then you can use his burst if you want, if it's ready, and then you can swap him off and repeat the entire process. All things considered, Varka's playstyle isn't all that complicated, but there is probably going to be room for combo maxing just because he's one of those normal attack heavy characters where the normal attacks actually contribute to timing of his skill slash charge attack and such. So that's something that's probably going to be mass tested once Varka is released. I'm not really one for combos, so I'm not really including further detail on that here. All right, let's move on to some important info or notes on Varka's kit and his build. First of all, you want to level up his skill talent first. That is the main priority. That's where most of his important multipliers are. And then you can level up his burst, and then you can ignore his normal attack talent. He just doesn't use it. Again, when it comes to his team, he wants a 2-2 team. 2 Anemo and 2 PHEC of the same element. That means 2 Pyro or 2 Hydro or 2 Electro or 2 Cryo. This gives him maximum buffs through his passive. And one of those teammates has to be a Hexerei character. Now, I will say that there is a high possibility that more old characters are going to be converted into Hexerei characters in the future, and they're probably going to be adding more Hexerei characters in the future as well, especially with Nicole and Alice presumably becoming playable in the Krai version. So look out for that, and hopefully Varka does get more teammates through that. Now, when it comes to his build and the stats that are important to him, he is obviously an attack scaling character, and again, he wants at least 2500 attack to max his passive, and that will be very easy to hit. Now, you don't really need to prioritize ER because his burst is one of those you can use it when it's ready, and you don't really need to go through constant effort to charge it up. When it comes to his goblet, this is a bit tricky because at Seed 0, a lot of his damage is actually of the PHEC element, not really his Anemo damage. So an attack goblet is a safe bet because it buffs both types of damage, both the Anemo damage and the PHEC damage. But elemental goblets, they could be on a case-by-case basis, like for example doing Pyro Goblet with a Bennett team because Bennett provides a lot of attack already. This also does not yet factor in Constellations because the Constellations, they could affect his stat preferences since they change his damage sources a little bit. So yeah, just baseline general build, attack goblet is the safe bet. Now of course you want to build crit. His signature weapon is a crit rate weapon, and the Hexerei artifact set gives crit rate. So if you're using both of them, be careful not to overcap crit rate on Varka's build. And then Hexerei set, of course, is pretty much made for him, the 4-piece, so hopefully you've been farming that. And then there are alternatives like using Marechaussee alongside Farina. There's Desert Pavilion. There's also Shiminawa's set, since his burst isn't all that important. There's Gladiator's set, and then I guess Bolide is also a thing if you're playing him with a shielder. But, you know, if you want the best of the best Varka, then I think you've probably been farming the Hexerei set this whole time. And then when it comes to his weapons, taking a look at his signature, it just does a lot for him. Like, there's a lot on this weapon, okay? It's a pretty valuable weapon for him. It gives him attack speed, it gives him a 30% damage bonus, and 30% crit damage. It's a lot, so, and it's very pretty on him. So that's going to be a very, very powerful weapon for him. But as a general blanket guideline, claymores with high base attack or decent base attack and a good crit stat, you know, the usual attack crit stat sticks. If you already have a good crit stat stick, then you can definitely just give it to him. There's also the good old Serpent Spine if you're a BP user, and then among free-to-play weapons, the Tidal Shadow is a good choice. But yeah, you're mainly looking at attack crit weapons. Alright, now let's talk about Varka's teams. As we said before, Varka's preferred team is going to have one Hexerei teammate and fulfill the 2-2 condition of 2 Anemo and 2 PHEC characters of the same element. Now, Varka's best team right now is Varka, Venti, Durin, and Bennett. And I'm throwing that out there right off the bat because it's kind of just like an all-around convenient team for him, and it was the smoothest by far on like the chambers that I did, and also the enemies in like the Abyss and City Sigyn around this time are going to cater to that team more than the other teams of Varka. I mean, Venti, he has the Hexerei buff. Durin, he's an amazing off-field support and pyro applicator and enabler, and he also does a good chunk of damage. And then there's Bennett, who's like every attack scaling DPS's best friend, and they complete the requirements of having one Hexerei character and two PHEC characters of the same element. Like, it's just a very neat team comp. And if you have Varka, then I hope that you have Durin or Venti, because that's going to be very helpful for you. And of course, I hope you have Bennett. When I tried playing Varka without his Hexerei passive active, which means without another Hexerei teammate, it was hard for me to get two special charge attacks slash skills before his Sturm and Drang mode expired. Like on Tidal Shadow, his free-to-play weapon, I just barely miss it. But on his signature, which gives attack speed, I just barely reach it. Now this can be skill issue, because if there are combos that like maximize how many hits he gets or maximizes hit lag more in order to like extend his Sturm and Drang mode or get his cooldown reductions faster, then those are possible to exploit. But I was, you know, trying my best at least with rather normal gameplay of like spamming his normal attacks, and it was a bit difficult without extra attack speed. So I will say that some teams and setups will be alright without the Hexerei buff, like if he has attack speed, but for the most part, he's generally better with it on if you want to comfortably get those two special charge attacks or skills. Now, if you don't have those characters, don't fear, because he has other potential teammates. And I will list down more teammates and possibilities in this section that I tried, but this is not exhaustive at all. And frankly, I'm pretty sure Varka is going to get best in slot teammates soon, because that's kind of been a trend throughout the Luna versions, wherein they release a DPS and then their premium support either before or after, you know? Like, what if Varka has a Lauma? We don't know yet. So let's just see what we're working with who's already out. So starting with Anemo teammates, other Anemo potential teammates include Aoife when you put him on a scroll set, and Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers. Now that's a combo that you can kind of just throw together with the scroll set. He'll be able to swirl the other element, and then that kind of buffs the entire team with elemental damage bonus. And then the TTDS is switching him in right before Varka to buff Varka's attack. There's also Farazan, and she's especially good with Constellations, of course, for Anemo DPSs. And she is still decent here, even if Varka's Anemo damage is a relatively smaller portion of his overall damage. Like, Farazan with Constellations will still do okay. And then there are other Anemo characters, just depending on who you have, such as Kazuha. There's Jean if you need off-field healing. And Sucrose is technically another Anemo option if you need a Hexerei character and you don't have Venti, or Venti's otherwise occupied. But just remember that this isn't an EM focused comp, and I know you might have other teams that like prefer Sucrose. So that's kind of the thing that Varka's juggling, wherein he does want the Hexerei character and he wants the two Anemo 2 PHEC of the same element. So team building here isn't all that convenient. So there are a bunch of other Anemo characters, of course, but then these are the ones that I did try out, and they performed like they did what they were meant to do. Now let's move on to the potential PHEC teammates. I'm gonna give some combos and comps, but again, not exhaustive. So when it comes to Pyro, obviously we stated Durin and Bennett. And one potential replacement for Durin, if you didn't pull him, I didn't pull him, is Mawika. So Mawika, she'll mostly be doing her off-field enabler playstyle here. And then yeah, alongside Bennett, it's still gonna be the same combo. Now when it comes to Hydro, the one that really comes to mind is Farina, because of course she gives a team-wide damage bonus buff. However, she also needs to be offset by a healer. Now, as we said, among Anemo teammates, there is Jean. She's a really effective party-wide healer for Farina, but then that kind of forces the last Hydro character to be Mona to fulfill the Hexerei condition. On the flip side, you can use Sucrose or Venti as your Anemo Hexerei, and then the second Hydro unit can be a healer like Barbara, Sijuin, or Kokomi, though none of those I would say are really amazing, because like Kokomi's Jellyfish is stationary, and we've been having some pretty mobile enemies anyway, but you know, they can work. So especially because Farina can give like a huge damage bonus buff to everyone, and she can even enable Marechaussee Hunter if that's who you're using. Like, it's kind of a test to work around Farina, but she can be worth it if you can achieve it. I also tried using Mono as prototype Amber to see if the healing was sufficient, but it really wasn't that comfortable. You could also try Jean, Farina, Yelan with Varka, but then you'd be missing out out on the Hexerei buff, and in practice I was still able to get the 2 charges on his skill during his on-field time. Of course, it took much slower. He stayed on field longer. It wasn't really that great, but he still cleared in a decent time. You know, it's something you can consider, especially if your Farina and Yelan are very well built for dishing damage. So what about Electro? Well, for Electro, I mostly tried to incorporate Fischl because she's an Electro Hexerei character, which gives more flexibility to the Anemo slot. The second Electro slot was actually what I had a harder time with, and it was kind of between Ian-san and Sarah because both of them function as buffers, and overall I had a smoother time with Ian-san. And then the second Anemo slot, well, you know, I tried a few combos, but honestly, among Electro characters, Fischl is just the main one I would consider, and then the second Electro slot would be depending on who you have and who can actually contribute to the team. Then among Cryo characters, there's Escoffier and Shenhe as your Cryo buffers. This team actually was pretty smooth. This team was pretty strong. I know that Escoffier isn't really doing as much as she can because it's not a full Hydro Cryo team. There are only going to be 2 Cryo characters on the team, which greatly diminishes the buff that she can give. But, you know, all things considered, it was like a smooth team. I was able to try them on both the chambers and enemies that favored Varka, but also the ones that kind of, you could tell, favored Skirk, because they'd say something like the buff is for cryo normal attacks or something like that. And with a Varka, Venti, Escoffier, Shenhe team, Varka can actually also do those cryo normal attacks in that against those enemies. So it worked out, and honestly, I kind of like this team. A little over the Electro characters even. So there are a bunch of duos and combos that you can try, but again, it'll be hard for them to be as good and as smooth and as cohesive as Varka, Venti, Durin, and Bennett right now. So team building for Varka is a bit rough because of the requirements or the preferences, if you want to be softer about it. And I do hope that they will add more to the roster, such as turning older characters into Hexerei characters in the coming versions. All right, moving on to his constellations. So really quick, Varka's C1 gives him an extra charge of his special skill, but note that it doesn't state any effects on his cooldown mechanics. Also, when Varka enters the Sturm and Drang mode, his first special skill and charge attack will be greatly buffed. Then his C2 gives an extra hit to his special skill slash charge attack that's AoE Anemo damage equal to 800% of his attack. That is a massive multiplier, and this is one scenario where I can see that, like, oh, maybe he wants an Anemo damage goblet, but you know, I don't really have calcs for that. It's just something to keep in mind if you're going for constellations. Then C3 increases skill level by 3. C4, when Varka triggers a swirl reaction, he gives 20% Anemo damage and PHEC damage bonus to the PHEC element involved to his entire team. And that's a pretty nice buff to his team, to be honest. Then C5 increases his burst level by 3, and then C6 makes it so that if you use a special skill or special charge attack, for a short time you can perform the other special attack without consuming a charge. So he kind of gets to spam his special attacks more frequently as C6, and C6 also mega buffs his crit damage for that sweet, sweet big PP damage. That's going to make him go all huge numbers and kind of turbo mode the entire time. So C6 enjoyers, have fun with that. Alright, as always, I'm going to cap off this video with my first impressions, or rather my personal thoughts on Varka after playing and testing him for a while. I actually found Varka to be a pretty fun character to play. Now, I'm not actually that fond of like on-field claymore users because their attacks are slower, hit lag is greater, and it doesn't feel as smooth and fast as sword users or other types of DPSs for me personally. But Varka, if you do get his signature weapon, he gets attack speed, and there are other ways to build attack speed on him through other equipment or other buffs. But even then, like his attack string or his playstyle, I found it fun to execute. Mechanically, his special skill is easier to execute, and it's smoother in the middle of a normal attack spam, because if you're doing his normal attacks and then you pause to hold the charged attack, sometimes there can be a bit of lag in the response. But then his special charged attack is also satisfying in itself. It's like a really fun big slash. And then his burst animation, it's not my personal favorite, but I do find it kind of comical. Like the first time I saw it, I just kind of snorted because it didn't look like anyone else's burst animation, but you know, it is what it is. It's kind of a shame that his burst is not amazing damage-wise because for some reason he generates so many animal particles and can recharge his burst really easily. I will say though that Varka is the latest in a trend of press skill to enter special state, and I wonder if they're going to change that up soon. I also think it's really funny that he's a dual claymore user because it's like Hoyo went, what can we do to make this already big buff man even more manly and even more buff? Just give him 2 huge swords, or 3. So that was kind of amusing, and he's also straightforward to build. Like, there are a lot of available attack crit weapons at the moment. He has a general best in slot artifact set, so hopefully you won't be too lacking in terms of equipment, and maybe you have a long way to farm, but at least right now, his potential sets are clear-cut. And then, honestly, aside from that, it's just his teams that are a bit rough right now. Like, I already said this earlier. So I am anticipating potential teammates for him, like Nicole, Lohen, and maybe more older characters will join the Hexerei faction. We'll see. Maybe adding older characters into the Hexerei faction so that we have more that can fulfill the conditions of Hexerei and PHEC, or Hexerei and Anemo. Like, if Jean becomes a Hexerei character, that would be amazing. If Bennett became a Hexerei character, that would solve a lot of problems. And, you know, there are probably other PHEC characters as well that could use the Hexerei thing just to synergize better with Varka. Compared to the Lunar Reaction releases in terms of power, I do feel like the Lunar Reaction releases were built a little OP, and that makes Varka feel a little less impressive in comparison when it comes to his damage. On his signature weapon, he feels pretty strong, or at least strong enough, but his lackluster damage output kind of shows when he's on his free-to-play weapon, because compared to the recent Lunar Reaction units on their free-to-play weapons, Varka is noticeably slower even on his premium team, which I have to say, like, is a little disappointing, and it's quite different from how the experience has been compared to like more recent units. But it is what it is. And new teammates might not be able to resolve this problem, but you know, maybe they will. Maybe we'll be surprised that he gets some really OP premium supports in the future. I don't know. We'll find out. Anyway, I am a husbando collector, so I will be pulling regardless, and let me know in the comments if you're also going to be pulling for Varka. I wish you a lot of luck. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you soon. Take care.